Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I'm your host, Alan Moore, and I'm excited to have XYPN member Chris Dale, founder of Life After Grief Financial Planning in Orlando, Florida, on the show today. Chris has a pretty incredible story of experiencing loss and grief in his own life, and he decided to channel that to helping people get through their own difficult situations. Chris left a broker-dealer because he didn't feel like they cared about him or the work he wanted to do, so he launched his own firm about a year ago. He's working on an advisor-facing program to help advisors work with their clients to navigate loss in their lives. He's actually been seeing quite a bit of traction getting clients from other advisors that aren't equipped or willing to work with clients going through difficult times, and he expects that to continue to be a source of new clients for his firm. Chris has a pretty amazing story, and more importantly, is doing some really amazing work in his firm and through his charitable involvement. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/158. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's the community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here's my interview with Chris. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'm excited to chat. So can you give me and listeners just a quick high-level overview of your firm, sort of where you located, how many clients do you have a niche, when did you get launched, and then we'll sort of dig into the details as we go.
Okay, I'll start with the first question. I'm located in Orlando, Florida, and I have a very specific niche, and it relates kind of to my background, which we'll get into a little bit later. But my niche is really relating to people and working with individuals or families that have experienced a significant grief in their life, mainly due to a death in the family, and how a family rebounds from that, unfortunate series of events financially. And really my goal is to alleviate everything financially for a client so they can focus only on repairing their life and learning how to regain joy in their life.
So are the vast majority of your clients, do they fit into that niche? Like most of the clients you're working with have experienced a loss?
I would say going forward, yes. There are some clients when I made the move about a year ago that have followed me and worked with me for, 15 or 16 years. But inevitably in their lifetime that I've worked with them, they've experienced a grief. And I've learned a lot from those clients, as well as my personal dealings with grief, and which has kind of gotten me here.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely explore all that because I think it's a really interesting niche because, as you say, like everyone will experience a loss at some point. Being able to help a client manage that loss is a whole other ballgame because most advisors are, quite honestly, not equipped. Human beings in general are not equipped to help clients or help other people go through those situations.
I would agree. It's the non-part of the financial planning.
It's the art, right? We always say the art and the science, and this is the art part that they just don't teach you in CFP school. So I definitely want to dig into that. So real quick, can you give me sort of a background on sort of your career path into making the decision to launch your own firm? Have you always been a financial advisor?
I have been what I would say is in private client management for probably the past 17 years or so. And whether you get down to the mechanics of a financial advisor, but in private client management. And at least for the last 10 years, I wanted to be in this capacity really on my own, but didn't really find an avenue. And I say the last 10 years and kind of my background to get me to this process. 10 years ago, I lost both of my parents within 2.5 months of each other. And I was a primary caregiver for, I would say both of my parents, for far longer than that. And I was in my early 20s, I guess, when I began caregiving for my parents. And you're trying to figure out the financial impact and just different things to do in regards to your parents. And it's very, very pressing. What I say is it's put hair on my chest to kind of go through those experiences. And if that wasn't enough, a couple of years after that, I lost my paternal grandmother. And then a couple of years after that, my wife and I lost our first child, who was a brother to my now oldest child, meaning he was a twin. And what those experiences brought me to where I am now, because it puts a different outlook on life, on what's important and what's not important. And I got to a point to where I didn't feel I was treated very well at my previous firm, and I didn't want to go to another firm, and I wanted to completely focus on working with the clients that I wanted to work with. And it brought me, to Life After Grief Financial Planning.
I have to say, in terms of like never actually knowing what to say to someone whenever they tell their story and when they're experiencing that, like that is just an immense amount of transition and loss in a very short amount of time for someone who's very young. It's one thing when someone our parents or grandparents' age is experiencing loss, just because you sort of expect it at a certain age, but not when you're as young as you are.
I would agree. And it's a very, very sensitive matter, but for me, it's not sensitive anymore. And it's very easy for me to interact and give advice and, just kind of keep people at peace when they're either dealing with someone that is going through that experience or, you're going through that experience yourself.
Yeah. And I imagine if you're working with a lot of clients that are in that, going through the situation where it does seem hopeless and it does seem there's no way life will ever be normal again, to be able to see you as an example of, hey, you never quote unquote get over it, but eventually you move past it and it doesn't, consume you anymore. And you can, live your life after grief. So I imagine that it's a great inspiration for the clients that are dealing with it.
It is. And I've had several people just, look me up in regards to just what I do and, my experience. And the experience is one aspect, which is very, very daunting. And the only way that I could describe my experience going through that transition in life is if you are some sort of an addict and you reach rock bottom. I've never been an addict of any kind, but that's the only way that I can describe it. Whether you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, you reach rock bottom and you have to figure out how you get back up. You got to pick yourself up somehow, some way. And I can say that I've had a lot of help, a lot of good people in my life, a lot of soul searching, and just a lot of researching and understanding how I move forward as an individual.
So you mentioned that, whenever you decided to launch your own firm because it wasn't working at the old firm, had you been, acting as a financial advisor? Were you a lead advisor in a previous role prior to launching your firm?
Yeah. I've been a lead advisor for clients for the past 17 years.
Okay. So you had a lot of experience as an advisor before you launched your own firm.
That is correct. A lot of experience. Yes. And when I launched my firm, it was really just kind of the mechanics of how to get it all together, which was a huge undertaking and a task on itself, because in the broker-dealer world, you're not privy to any of that information.
Yeah, it's a great point. And one of the struggles that we see from folks that are coming from that world is that they're used to being told, like, this is the way it's done. You don't have options. It's not like you can like, oh, I want a new logo. I'll just go get my own logo, and suddenly you're like, okay, I'm going to start my own firm and I have every potential. It's almost overwhelming because there's so many options when you're starting a firm. It's hard because it's, an infinite number.
Yeah, I would agree. One of the things that I did, and I think this was the best thing that I could have done, I had a great idea of what I wanted my firm to look like, not necessarily in the format of Life After Grief Financial Planning, but I knew what I wanted to do and ultimately wanted to do. And I also knew that I didn't want to be handcuffed any longer. And I knew there was some sort of mechanism to get that out there. And I'll give a shout out to the FPA. So I went to the FPA and asked them very specifically if they could pair me up with a mentor. And I asked very specifically if they could pair me up with a female mentor who was significantly more experienced and older than I was. And they did a very, very good job. And she and I met virtually for 7 months while I was getting my business plan up and going. And she would just counsel me on what I needed to think about here or what I needed to think about there until, I finally launched. And she was a huge advocate for me and really saw me to success. And that's what I mean by that. I've had a lot of good people in my life. She really helped me kind of formulate what I had conceptually in my mind into what I wanted to do on paper.
Yes, I'm curious, why did you specifically request a female mentor?
I requested a female mentor. One is because I felt that there would be no ego there dealing with someone that is a lot more experienced. And I didn't want to have to deal with any of the time frame or the lag time of kind of getting through, mechanics of personality. I just wanted to lay my cards out on the table and, kind of get through the process of getting a mentor and getting on to the next step. And what that also leads me kind of digging a little bit deeper through my research and through my personal experience with grievers. I've highlighted two types of grievers, one being an intuitive griever and one being an analytical griever. And an intuitive griever are more like females that are more apt to put their emotions out on the table and get through the status of grief faster and at a more healthy rate than would be an analytical griever. And men and women just kind of fit separately. And that's a little bit of the background, kind of high level, as to why I chose a female.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I would probably be considered an analytical griever. Why talk about these things when you could just deal with them, right?
Right. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So, yeah, I've heard great things about the FPA mentorship program. So for folks that are out there, I know FPA has one, CFP board has one. We're sort of in the process of building out our own mentorship program, specifically at XY, because we've mainly done study groups, but one-on-one mentorship with people that have walked the path that you're trying to walk is always helpful. So I'm a huge proponent of having a mentor. So it's great to know that the FPA program was so successful for you, and that's available to FPA members. So go join FPA and find a mentor. It's probably well worth 10 years of membership fees just to get connected with her.
I would agree. Totally.
So was there anything in particular that sort of pushed you over the edge when it came to launching a firm, or was it just sort of a culmination of, just recognizing that, it was time and that was the direction you wanted to go?
There's a few things that pushed me over the edge. One is my former broker-dealer. I felt that they didn't care about me as an individual. They just looked at me as a number and someone to bring revenue into their company. And I've always been someone that has only viewed money as a means to an end. And so I don't work for money. You have to support your family and you have to have a good style of life. I do believe in that. But in my lifetime, I've seen money completely evaporate. And so, at the beginning of, my early years, my mother was a teacher and my dad was an entrepreneur. And my father would be willing to risk everything on the line for the next big deal, whether it failed or whether it succeeded. And I saw some failures. And then, to fast forward to where I had to support my parents and I had to put my mother into a nursing home. And so those are both daunting experiences financially. And so I like to live, where I'm comfortable. And so that kind of pushed me over the edge because, like I said, my former firm, I didn't feel that they cared for me. And I had to work with anyone they said that I had to work with. Then the other part of that, too, is I have two small children. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. And I wasn't in a situation to where I could spend as much time with them as I wanted to, along with my wife. And I have no idea how much longer I'm going to be on this earth. There's no guarantees. And the last thing that I'll ever want to say is I spent, more time working than I spent with my family. And so those were some of the things that pushed me over the edge to, work with, this new venture in life. And then ultimately I can give back to the people that were like me several years ago. And so, you put all those things together, my life is grand. I have no complaints.
I love it. I think most people spend a lifetime to try to be able to make that statement. and it's what I love about this profession. I mean, one is the fact that, our job is to help our clients be able to make that statement, but also that this career path does involve enough flexibility that most of us can create that ideal life for ourselves inside the profession. And it happens in different ways. Some folks it's at a broker dealer, some folks it's owning a company, some folks it's working in a support of advisor role, like at the XYPN network, that sort of thing. But that it does provide the flexibility to be able to do that. We don't talk to a lot of folks who are like, oh, I hate this profession. Most of the folks that are working in it tend to love it, which is really exciting.
Well, I can give you a very specific example to the point of spending time with my family. So before I left my former broker dealer, I had to continue as if I were working, meaning I had appointments that I had to keep setting as if I was going to continue to be there. So there was an appointment that I set for sometime in July of 2017. And I remember having to set that appointment because I was still employed, but I was getting ready to give my letter of resignation. And I remember sitting in my office at home after I had resigned, and my child's school called and said that we need you to come and pick him up immediately because he's sick and he's pale. And the appointment that I spoke about, that would have been with my former broker dealer, I would have been 2 hours away. And my wife is a nurse, and she wouldn't have been able to get to the school until after hours if they would have been able to if she would have been able to go at all. And so it just reinforced I made the right decision, because at that point, when they called me, I was in my home office, which is about 10 minutes from my child's school, and I went to go pick him up. And nothing can replace that feeling that I had of not having to be 2 hours away because I was working for somebody else. I was working for myself, and I could take the time to go and pick up my child.
Yeah, you make a great point. I would say that's probably number one reason cited for ultimately launching a firm is just control of schedule. Because the median age of a member in XY is around 38. We're right at the cutoff between Gen X and Gen Y, which is really interesting. So half of our members are Gen Y and half of them are Gen X or boomers. But, so many of us have young kids and families, and just the flexibility to be able to do that sort of thing and go pick up a sick kid or go spend a morning on a field trip outing to go see the grizzly bears or whatever it is. That's what we do in Montana. I don't know what they do in Orlando. Probably no grizzly bears there. But, those are things that we want to be able to do and be able to balance. And I think that's, it's so important because I know a lot of folks stigmatize the millennial generation whenever we say work-life balance as being lazy, that, you don't want to have to work hard. And it's not that we want to work hard. It's just there are other things I also want to be able to do, like pick up my kid when they're sick, in addition to working hard, and the flexibility to do that.
That's exactly right. I agree. And I can also work remotely where I was not able to really truly do that before. So that was one of the things that I was missing before. Sure, I could work from home on occasion, but I can work anywhere in the continental U.S. at this point, as long as I have internet access.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So were you able to bring some of your clients over whenever you launched your RIA? You said you had a couple.
Yeah, I was able to bring. So there have been clients that have been following me really since I started this journey. And so there were a few of those folks that followed me. And I left my prior firm with the expectation that no clients were going to follow me. And that's the part that I talk about money, because I didn't want to plan on, folks following me and then be disappointed that they did not follow me. And so I left, and I was pleasantly surprised that some of those folks did follow me. And it made the transition a lot less cumbersome, a lot less stressful. And then what it also allowed me to do is it allowed me to do some of the other things that I wanted to do. One of the things that I committed to myself during this journey is to be a volunteer for a hospice organization. And that volunteering looks like an hour or so a week volunteering with a hospice patient. It's a commitment, but that's what I wanted to do. That was, the form of giving back. And I've always been told in my lifetime that I've been given a lot, so I need to give back in the same fashion. And so I'm able to do that. And it's also allowed me to help other advisors who are, trying to work with clients that fit within my niche. And there have been several advisors over the past year or so that have reached out to me asking me for my advice on, how I help with this client or how I help with that client. And it's also led me, also from the point of view of my mentor, to dive into the realm of opening up a consulting aspect specific to my niche and helping out advisors.
Oh, that's interesting. So have you started doing that, or is that something that you're looking at doing?
Actually, I'm in probably the eighth inning of that process, formatting my website to be up and running probably within the next 2 months. And it really looks like a curriculum, with some advisors as guinea pigs to kind of give me some feedback on what they're looking for. And I quickly figured out in the process of me being an RIA, I'm going to be limited on how many people I can actually help out in the universe. And if I can help advisors at the same point, through my experience and through my professional knowledge of individual situations, I can give back in that manner as well.
I love that because, people ask me all the time if I miss being an advisor since I'm no longer running a firm. And that's usually my response is that, ultimately I believe in the work that we do as planners, but ultimately there's a cap to the number of people we can serve. So either I was going to scale a very large financial planning firm to try to serve a bunch of clients, or, you scale XY Planning Network to help the advisors help their clients. And so, this was the path that I chose. But, I definitely believe that, like we said, every client is going to deal with a loss. Every client is going to go through this, or their family member is going to go through it when the client passes away. And so there's, but it happens so infrequently as an advisor to your client base, particularly when you're, in your 30s or 40s and you're working with clients. It's a little different than if you're working with a bunch of clients in their 60s and 70s. That it's hard when it happens once every 5 to 10 years and you don't know what to do.
Right. Exactly right.
So, because, it's been 6 or 7 years ago now, I went through Amy Florian's grief program for financial advisors. Is that a program you've ever been through, or are you familiar with it?
I've never been through it, but I have read her book, which is a very, very good book, which is the No Longer Awkward book. And what I've also done to couple my formal education is, Hospice of the Comforter here in Orlando, they have about a 20 to 25 hour training program for all of their volunteers. So I utilized a lot of that, a lot of my personal experience, and a lot of the reading material that I've been reading since I've been on this journey. Because when I first started, I learned that I was part analytical and part intuitive. No one is better than the other, but the intuitive side of me allowed me to do a lot of writing over the past 10 plus years. And so I was able to draw a lot of that information, when I'm parlaying advice to either clients or other advisors. And one of the things that you had referenced early on was, when someone passes away, our first instinct is to say, I'm sorry. And it's heartfelt from the person that is saying it, but it might not necessarily be the best thing to say. And depending on the person that you're dealing with, it might be more appropriate, to say to them, I can't imagine how hard this is for you. And that just opens up, other realms of possibility. It doesn't discount how they're feeling. It lets them know, one, that you really don't know how they're feeling and that this is a very, very trying time. And in my blogs, I do a lot of blogging now, one of which is to say what to say to a griever and, what not to say to a griever. Some very, very specific things, among others. So it's this process is really a lot of fun for me. It may not necessarily be a lot of fun for other people, but it allows me to give what I call as a gift. I've been given this gift, even though I've experienced a very, very traumatic road of 4 significant deaths in my life, but they've given me a completely different outlook on life. And it's allowed me to help out a lot of other people in ways that I would never be able to help out before. And that's the gift that I refer to on an ongoing basis.
It's such a great point that, again, like normally people say, I'm sorry, or, oh, that must suck, or whatever, just because it's like, it's the response. And typically whatever is like the immediate response is the wrong one. It's just really, just because it is awkward. And like, for some folks, like you may not be close enough that, you may not want to open the floodgates, or it just takes you by surprise, or if you do want to open it and open the door, but, for fear of people shutting the door, right? You can open the door for someone to share, but they're not interested in sharing with you, and which can be a little awkward as well. So, I do think it is one of those things that just being aware and talking to folks potentially that have experienced loss helps, because, you don't know what you don't know, right? And that's where I was going to ask a question, like, do you feel like for someone who has not experienced significant loss, do you believe that they can be as effective working with clients that are going through those situations as someone who has experienced loss, or is it something you truly have to experience for yourself before you can really be equipped?
I really believe that you have to surround yourself with the right people. And so whether you've experienced loss or not, if you're surrounded with the right people, I think that you can speed up your learning curve. I'm actually in the process of counseling a gentleman right now, an advisor, who hasn't really experienced significant grief himself personally, but his wife is a counselor and he has access to hospice organizations and grief counseling in his area. And he's really motivated to utilize those services and connect them to the client. And so one of the things too, I've actually written an article for NAPFA, which will be coming up, I think it'll be published sometime next month. And it talks about kind of the timeline of dealing with grievers, different dynamics, family dynamics, whether you are the advisor want to work with someone that is grieved. And it's okay to, raise your hand and say, I'm not the right person to work with you. No one will look down on, that advisor, as long as you're able to, introduce them to someone that is prepared to, take on the task of helping them out. And then the other part too that I find is very, very important, and whether you're an advisor working with grievers or not, is the follow-up. Because, working with folks that are grieving, they're going to be in this mental fog, depending on what grief state they are in. And I purposely kind of focus on those first 6 months. They're going to be in a fog. So they really need someone to really hold their hand, really be held accountable, and understand, what things that they need to focus on financially or otherwise, and what their time frame is going to be in. So, like I said, you don't necessarily have to have experienced grief if you are able to surround yourself with the right people that can help you help your client ultimately.
Yeah, it's really tough because I feel like as an advisor, you say like, no, I don't work with people that are experiencing this grief. Like eventually you're going to lose all your clients, right? I mean, just because you can only work with them between losses, and eventually everyone's going to deal with this. So I do feel like for someone to say that, like, it almost feels like sort of ignoring or maybe just having a different philosophy on the work that we do as financial advisors. I know plenty of advisors that would not be comfortable with a client crying in their office for whatever reason. And I was just raised in the world of financial planning that like tears meant you were getting somewhere, whatever it was, and not necessarily dealing with grief, but like, I mean, just in the world of emotion, we want that emotion in the meeting, but to reject that just wholeheartedly, that I think it would be tough to be an advisor and not be willing to step into that place with a client.
I would agree, but it's a very, very delicate and very sensitive situation. And I could just paint the picture here. If you are, and I'll just stereotype right now, and I'll use myself. Before I was married, very, very A-type personality, and, the world was mine and nothing could go wrong. And I, at that time, may or may not have said, I don't think this is the right person to work with. I'll pass this person on. And I don't think at that point in my life, I would have been the best person to work with someone that was grieving. As a young, somewhat arrogant male. And, now the tables are totally turned because I've gotten married, I've experienced, what we've just talked about, and I'm ready and willing to, help with any of those situations. And I just really think it's a sensitive topic. And, if you have a client that is in that situation, maybe not necessarily turning them away, but maybe getting someone else on your team to help with the process of you being more empathetic. That's another aspect as well.
Yeah, it's a tough lesson to learn until you screw it up, right? Because even when you're like, the guy with that lacks empathy, when you say the wrong thing, it's pretty obvious.
Right. You definitely do.
It's written on your wife's face or someone who, or your client or whoever, when you're like, oh yeah, I went the wrong direction with that one. No, I was in the same boat. When I came out of college, I was like a freight train, bull in a china shop. And I was very lucky to have Rick Kaler as my first boss because he was the one who tamed the beast, if you will. And it helped me realize that it wasn't just numbers and that, we're dealing with real people with real lives, and real lives are hard. Real lives aren't a straight line on a retirement calculator. As much as we wish they were, it jumps up and around and does crazy things. And, our job is to be there with our clients through that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I quickly learned that early on, hence some of the folks that followed me when I left my last broker dealer. When you do things do things in the right way, and it comes back, to reward you. And I believe that's the reward that I have experienced.
So when you started your own RIA, was this the plan to focus on this niche, or did that develop I guess in your first year, or was this the plan, sort of the firm that you have today is what you intended to build?
It was the plan from when I first started my business plan. So before I started the RIA, and I didn't waver.
Have you gotten pushback on it from anyone? I mean, it sounds like your mentor was supportive, but has anyone been like, dude, this is crazy. Why? This isn't a business plan.
Actually, there was a client that pushed back on me that said, why would you want to focus on this niche? You're really limiting yourself. People that have come to me, whatever source, have said, I don't know if I'm the right fit for you, but I'd like to work with you anyways. And, I've kind of had maybe an initial conversation, and I said, I don't think you're the right fit for my firm. Because one of the things my mentor had said to me is you want to have space for these individuals for when they come on board, because they're going to take a lot of time. That may not necessarily be always financial planning time. And, I said, you know what, you're right. And I'm glad that I did that, because it has freed up my time. And that also means I've had to focus on other areas of running the business that I've had to free up my time as well. Because when I get with a client, I want to have 100% focus on that client. And I don't want to have anything that is sidetracking me from that, that client, because they're coming to me for a reason. And they want me to really understand their situation, empathize with their situation, and give them solid advice and almost immediate advice in some instances. So, and I'm ready and I'm prepared to do that.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, being sure you save enough spots for your ideal client. And I think that was great advice from your mentor. That's even one step further in saying, you need to save enough spots for your ideal client so you're not getting distracted by non-ideal clients. But each of your clients, in your case, are more more time intensive, but really emotionally intensive. Because even if you love this work, I imagine it's an emotional drain for you, and it takes a little while to recharge. You couldn't do 8 introductory meetings in a day, right? Like it would just, I feel like that would just kill you just trying to be that connected. And I guess therapists are able to do it with a lot of training. But
yeah, and there's a fine line for me, because I'm at a point now in my life where I can disconnect. I can go in and have a meeting with the client, and I can be emotionally disconnected almost as soon as I leave.
That is a talent.
Yeah, well, there's good and bad aspects of that. And I learned that during the process. There were some other deaths that I experienced through the process that weren't immediate family members. And there was a situation to where one of my best friends, where, not to make this a long story, but I interacted with his father shortly before he passed away. And I was instrumental in, really helping the family out while my friend was out of the state. He was on vacation, and his father later died before he got there. But I knew I had to remove myself from the situation, because I was getting too close, and it was going to set me back. And looking back at that experience and fast forward, that's why I'm able to say now I'm able to disconnect, from some situations because I've been in the thick of several situations and I just know how to disconnect. And I'm not going to say that that's always going to be the case, but I know that my life outside of this individual relationship, I'm going to go to my life again. And my life is not that person's life, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think it's really important. That is, I assume, developed from having had many of these conversations. The first couple are not nearly as easy. I remember one of the things they taught us in grad school, because we did some collaboration with the marriage and family therapy department at the University of Georgia, but was that therapists tend to have a ritual between meetings. And one example of that would be go wash your hands. And so between meetings, you wash your hands, you splash some water on your face, and you sort of reset for the next meeting. But again, they spend like 2,000 hours training in order to be able to do that. So it's not something that, advisors are just going to pick up, but you can definitely start to hone those skills and try to get better at it. If this is an area where you want to spend a lot of time, more so than just, as life happens to your clients.
Right. I agree.
So switching gears a little bit, what is your firm structure when you're onboarding a new client? So a client comes to you, are they pretty much, you said sort of going forward, they're all pretty much in the middle of experiencing a loss, but you also said you try not to do things for the first 6 months. So I guess what is your process for a new client?
So my process for a new client, generally, and I'll kind of define the line in the sand. So a new client that has already experienced a death, I'll kind of draw that line in the sand. So, and I'll just use an example of a lady that I started working with probably in the last couple of weeks. Her husband died within the last couple of months or so. And the process that I take is I really have to have a very, very good understanding of their entire financial picture. So that means I have to have a cash flow analysis done on the client, and I have to have a good understanding of all of their assets. And that doesn't necessarily mean I spit out a couple of forms in front of those clients and have them fill it out, because I understand that they're not going to be able to do that in a very, very good manner, no matter how easy I make that. So it really depends, but I need to get that information up front. So one, I can understand if it's a spouse that has had no dealings with the finances prior, and now they're thrown into the thick of having to manage all the finances. I need to have a very, very good understanding of that. And then two, I should also have a good understanding of all of their assets to when we're kind of dictating what really needs to go on here. So those are two of the things that I get right up front, when we're onboarding clients. And from that situation, once I get all that information, have a very, very good understanding, then we can talk about the mechanics of onboarding them. And it's truly, am I a good fit for them, or is the client a good fit for me? And I've had a few people that said, Chris, I don't think that, you're a good fit for me for whatever reason. And I respect that. And just say fast forward, we get to the point where we're working together. Some of the tech stack that I use, I onboard them. I happen to use eMoney with a combination of MoneyGuide Pro. And I onboard them that way because it's very easy for me to have a client have a virtual vault. We can always refer to that. And I do that because no matter what I'm writing down or what I articulate to a client that is in grief, they are ultimately going to forget. So if we have a virtual record, which they can access, then it's always documented there. And then it kind of falls back into whatever planning arrangement we have in regards to the planning process. So just to kind of summarize that, I get a cash flow, generally a personal financial statement, and then we kind of back things into a combination of eMoney and MoneyGuide Pro to utilize for some of the technology.
So you do use MoneyGuide Pro and eMoney. Can you explain why you're using multiple pretty robust softwares? And there's a lot of overlap, I feel like. So what is your process for managing both of those technologies?
So I use MoneyGuide Pro exclusively for the financial planning aspect. And I utilize that because I was used to that in a former life, and some of the clients that followed me were used to that in a former life. And then also the combination with eMoney, and I agree with you, there is overlap. But there's some limitations to e-money in the financial planning aspect that I just couldn't get over. And so, but the access to having a personal website for the clients and then also having a virtual vault for the clients, and then just some of the reporting software that is, you can pull up a PFS for a client. You can pull up any number of reports for clients. And from the client's aspect too, it's very, very easy to use on their end, from what I found. And I try to be very, very good about asking clients feedback. If there's something they do or do not like, and they're very ready to tell me what they do or do not like. So those are some of the reasons as to why I use both softwares.
Okay. We always want to simplify things, right? Especially as you're getting started, because the last thing you need to be doing is managing a bunch of unnecessary things. But if the technology doesn't do what you need it to do, you got to have both. So you may get a call from a Money Guide Pro or eMoney rep explaining how wrong you are and how you only need one of their softwares. No. So what is your fee structure with clients? How have you structured that when clients are coming in, sort of upfront fees, ongoing fees, that sort of thing?
Okay, so and this is ongoing, and it'll always change, and I'm sure you know that. So my fee structure is basically a three-pronged approach. So I will charge for a financial plan because I believe there's a worth and a cost to doing that. Then I also charge a fee, whether you want to call it a retainer fee or otherwise, a fee for administering the plan and basically having ongoing access to life after grief financial planning after the financial plan is done. And then there's also a separate fee for charging for assets under management. And with all that being said, if a client has a certain amount of assets, then there is no charge for financial planning fees or for ongoing financial planning or the retainer.
I'm sorry. So with the financial planning fee, there's no fee for planning with a minimum AUM? Just
That's correct.
Being sure I caught that. Okay. And remind me, what's the minimum AUM there?
The minimum AUM there would be $500,000.
Okay. So if it's less than 500,000, it's planning fee plus AUM. And then at 500,000, the planning fee goes away.
Correct.
So how many clients do you currently have total, and then sort of amongst those two different service models?
So I have total of about 10 clients. And I'd say probably maybe one or two with the different service model, the different models. And what I found, honestly, is that the AUM is easier to understand, and it's easier just to kind of roll it all up under AUM, versus having different fees. And I've gotten a lot of pushback for different fees, having the financial planning fee and then also having the retainer. So why am I paying for a financial plan? Well, there's a value there. And then why am I paying an ongoing fee? Well, we need to institute what's going on in the financial plan. And I think it's a matter of, and this is the feedback that I've been told, well, I'm not used to having to fork out money on a regular basis. I'm used to assets just being withdrawn or money being withdrawn from my assets that are being managed.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of where I've gotten, some of the pushback there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting and a fair point that we do see more client pushback when clients have engaged advisors in the past and haven't paid for it, whether they were paying on commission and didn't realize it, or they were just having the money deducted out of the asset accounts that, they may not have even realized what they were paying. Because, 1% sure does sound a lot better than $10,000 if you have $1 million in assets, or $5,000 if you have $500,000. So 1% sounds better, and it gets deducted, only 1/4 of that at a time, and so it's not as painful. But I do wonder if it's different, and we don't have good data on this at this point. But if it is different when you're engaging with clients that have never had an advisor versus those who have had an advisor and charged differently, and just trying to help them understand why you're charging in a different way without making it all about the money.
Correct. And then it's also a fair point to note too, when you're talking to clients, grieving or not, to make the aspect of what you charge as simple as possible and as easy to understand. And, that's been a journey in itself. And I've tried to make it as easy to understand as possible. And I've, borrowed some information from some of my study groups So when a client comes to me or a prospect comes to me and I give them this proposal, if you will, and they are able to articulate it back to me and say, I see this, this, and this, then I know I've made it as easy as possible for them to understand, whether they decide to sign on with me or not.
Yeah, being able, you want your clients to understand what they're paying, not to the point of obsessing over it, right? We don't want our clients sitting around, they're paying $100 a month, $150 a month. It's not that we want them sitting around saying like, oh, I'm paying $150 a month and thinking about it all the time. It's that we just want it to be transparent and we want them to know what they're paying. But most importantly, we want them to be able to pay you if they don't have assets. I mean, that's really what this whole model was all about, was saying that, ultimately there's the majority of prospective clients out there don't have enough money to hit that $500,000 level. So therefore, how do we get paid? And to say that we don't provide value to somebody that doesn't have assets is absurd. However, if they do have assets, AUM may be an easier way to charge. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It just don't tell me you can't work with young people because they don't have any money. They have income. They just don't have assets saved in an IRA that's liquid waiting for you to manage it, which is fine.
Yeah, I agree. I agree totally.
So where are you seeing clients coming from? Is it primarily referrals from other advisors or just sort of your brand getting out there, or your work with a hospice organization? Like what are you seeing as successful traction points for your business?
Well, I'm going to answer that in the forms of me marketing. So me marketing looks a little bit different, I would say, than the average advisor. So one of the things that I do, and this is also a plug for the FPA, is I do some volunteering for the FBA here locally. And they have a telethon once a year, and then they basically send questions to advisors. And what they will do is they will publish your answer to the question that the general public answers. They publish it in our local newspaper. And so I've gotten some traction there. Then I've also gotten some traction from NAPA. I've gotten some traction from the FPA. Several sources there. From some local attorneys, I've gotten some traction that I've worked with for a long time. And there was one person that just was looking up information on an advisor that had dealt with grief specifically, and a gal found me that way. So it's very, very targeted, and that was really what I wanted to do on the front end. Is I wanted to have people go to my website, really understand what I did, and then if they want to, contact me, then they would.
Beauty of having a niche, right? Is when someone is looking for an advisor that specifically deals with that situation, you're going to pop up. How are you feeling? You're almost a year in. Are you happy with the growth rate? Are you looking for ways to grow faster? Are you growing as fast as you can? How are you feeling about business right now?
I like my growth rate right now. I don't want to grow too fast because my goal is not to have a super firm, with 1,000 clients. And there's a fine line to where, I'm able to service clients at a very, very high level and not have too many clients. And I don't want to be missing things with clients. And so the growth rate, I'm satisfied with the growth rate. And I think, at any point, anybody would say, well, they'd like to be a little bit faster. Sure, I'm not going to say that I wouldn't like the growth rate to be a little bit faster, but I'm fine with where it is right now. And my goal isn't to have 100 or 200 clients at the end of the day. My goal is probably to have somewhere 30 to maybe 50 clients at the end of the day. And that's why I kind of alluded to the aspect of the consulting arena, because it would be very, very hard to train someone my experience, if that makes sense. So, and I have to understand that dynamic. And I mean, I could train someone the mechanics of financial planning, but unless someone has truly been through, a lot of the throes of grief, it would be very, very hard to have somebody, like that in my capacity. Not saying that it couldn't be done or that there isn't someone else out there, but in my travels and getting help with my own grief, I never met anyone that was my age, younger or slightly older, that had been through, what I had been through. And I've met a lot of people.
Yeah. So is that sort of like you would grow if you felt like you could find the right people, or, you just feel like it's going to be one of those things that you anticipate that will be the thing that holds you back?
No, I don't want to grow so large because at a certain point, I see that taking away from my family, and I don't want to do that. And so right now, as I was going through my business plan very, very early on, that was, what I initially thought. And I'm never going to say that things won't change in the future, but at this point and for the foreseeable future, I don't see, being in a situation to where I have such a large firm. And I've surrounded myself such that, running a business, and again, my mentor is very, very helpful. And so some of the things that I vet out, I have someone that does all of the administrative work for me because one, I hate doing that and I'm terrible at doing that. So I know my shortfalls. And so I have, basically it's a virtual advisor that does that. And they have their own firm, their own RIA, but that's just kind of a side venture. So I was very, very comfortable and very fortunate to find them to be able to do that. So that alleviates a lot of the admin stuff that I would have to do as a business owner. And it truly just allows me to focus on the clients.
Interesting. So you have hired another firm owner to do a lot of that work for you.
That's correct. Yes.
Are they a member of XY Planning Network, or just how did you find them?
I actually found them through my mentor. I don't know if they are a member of XY Planning Network, but I do know they are going to XY Live 2018.
Heck yeah. All right. Thanks for the shout out. XYPN 18 in St. Louis is going to be awesome. No, that's really cool that
I said, as I will be there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it looks like we're going to have just over 500 advisors there this year, which is a pretty significant jump from last year, probably about 150 more than we had last year. So it's growing, but it really is just a fun opportunity to be able to hang out with advisors that don't think you're crazy. Like, I don't know if this has been your experience, but particularly in the niche that you're in, like, I just feel like if you go to a generic conference and you tell some advisors what you do, they're going to be like, what in the world are you talking about? That's not financial planning. Like, you didn't say anything about, hardcore investment management. And it's like, no, like this is the real stuff. Like, this is the real stuff our clients are dealing with. And you're just putting it in the name of your firm and letting everyone know, hey, this is my specialty. This isn't just something I deal with. This is something I'm equipped to help people with. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's been your experience, but I can imagine you get a lot of funny looks when you try to explain your business model.
Yeah, I get a lot of funny looks. And even some of my friends, they joke and they say, do you really have a job or do you really work? And I really do work. I work very, very hard. You might not necessarily see me working, but I work very, very hard.
Oh, it's such a great point. Like, is that a real job? I felt like I dealt with that for a long time of like, I do have a real job. I promise. Like, I do really work, which is always fun, but part of it. So I guess, what are you working on now? I mean, you said, you have the advisor facing program. So can you share the name of that or at least how people can get on a list to find out more about that once it's launched?
Sure. It's Life After Grief Consulting. That's what the name of the company is. And what I've been kind of developing, so as I've been blogging for Life After Grief Financial Planning, I've found that a lot of my blogs and a lot of the information had to deal with how do you identify a griever, what to say to a griever, what not to say to a griever, what's the proper time frame with developing or working with a griever. And that's kind of the start of it. And so like I said, a lot of the blogging went into some of those dynamics and with regard to a lot of other dynamics. And also, you pair that with me giving advice to some advisors specifically. So I decided, well, I'll develop this consulting aspect. And part of this consulting aspect will have basically a curriculum 1 through 10 or so that will start off at the very, very basic level of when you're dealing with a griever of how do you identify whether you're dealing with an intuitive griever or an analytical griever. And I think that's very, very important to know because it's going to help you understand how fast or how slow the griever is going to move through the grieving process and how fast they're going to be able to maneuver through the financial planning process. And it's really fun for me because I can put this information out there and, I can help out a lot of people. And it's already information that I've really already been writing and designed for a long time. It's just me putting it into a format where, other advisors can go in. They can either pick parts of it that they think is pertinent for them, helping out their clients, or they can pick all of it. If they are just starting out, and to your point, Alan, someone that has never experienced grief personally in their own life, and they really want to take on the challenge of working with a grieving client. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we want to be sure that advisors know where to find you because, I do think this is just such important work, and important training. And like I said, you don't know you need it until you need it. And you're sitting across from a client. I'll never forget I think my first experience with this was meeting with a client whose father and mother had passed away within like 6 or 8 months of each other. And they inherited like $5 million. And they had no idea. They didn't know their parents had any money. And so we were sitting there and talking through it and inheriting $5 million. And you're like, why are you not like jumping up and down excited? And of course, in my ignorance, one, they had lost their parents and going through that. But the second piece was their parents had lived like misers and had really deprived themselves financially and not done some of the things they needed to do for their own health and their own wellness just because they weren't willing to spend the money. And their kids had no idea. And they felt guilty getting the money. And I just remember like that was one of my early experiences of being like, wow, like this is not just an Excel spreadsheet. This is not just telling someone they need to save more money. This is real life. And this is, people that we're dealing with and dealing with the human brain, which the brain sucks sometimes. It just doesn't work the way we want it to work. But, this is our world. And if we really want to be effective planners and really help our clients, this is the stuff that's going to come up and that we've got to be willing to address.
Yeah, I would agree. And a major part of that too, you alluded to is, the communication. So most people, if they inherited $5 million, would be jumping up in joy, aside from the death of their parents. So those parents most likely instilled in those parents, and there's a lot of psychology that goes into this too, instilled into those children to live, really within their means for the most part. And so when they did come into this money, they'd have no idea what to do with it. And it's so much above and beyond what they would need, or two, know what to do with. And so those clients really become easier clients to, work with. And it's just, there's so much to understand, through this process. Grief triggers come to mind, support services, understanding the stages of grief are some of the other things that come to mind, and which are all components of my curriculum, if you will. And it really helps to lay the foundation and understanding, who you're dealing with and really how to help them. And if something pops up to where, you mention a red car driving down the street and your client automatically just starts bawling, you're not going to think that they're crazy. You're going to think, well, maybe I triggered something in grief within that client. And it's really about understanding. So there's a lot, under the surface that kind of goes on. And I can guarantee if you're able to successfully help out a client through grief, you're going to have that client for life, because they're going to really appreciate, your ability to sit through with them during the process and really be able to guide them on to success financially. And that's really ultimately, what I want to do. And like I said, money for me is only a means to an end. And I learned that very, very early in life. Anything that I've acquired or amassed, it can be gone today or tomorrow, but the memories that I have with my family, those will always be with me. So those are some things that you can't erase. That's kind of how I take an outlook on life, since all this has happened to me.
I love it. It's putting things in perspective, which is, as an entrepreneur, very difficult to do at times, but critical if you really want to be successful. So as we're coming to a close, I'd love to ask you our final question. You've shared so much wisdom and learning over the years that you've had. But, if there's one thing that you've learned, either since starting your firm or just sort of throughout your career as a financial advisor, there's one thing that you wish you had known previously that you've learned, a piece of advice you would go back and tell your younger self. What do you think that piece of advice would be?
I wish I had done this earlier.
Launching a firm?
Yes, I wish I had done it earlier. Yes. That's the piece of advice that I would give my younger self. Figure out a way to make it happen earlier.
All right. I love it. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share, again, what you've learned over the years and this first year in business. I'm really excited to watch your firm grow and continue to develop your expertise and soon be helping a lot of other advisors work through these difficult situations with clients. So thank you for taking the time to come on.
No, thank you, Alan, for the opportunity. I enjoy speaking. It's fun for me.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes with myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.